I don't even know where to begin. There are so many layers of lament. For many years, I have regularly advocated for reproductive justice at the New York State Capitol with both Planned Parenthood and clergy for reproductive choice. Often, one of the older women in the group I was advocating with would wear a hanger necklace or hanger earrings, or they would carry one with them. And this is my first confession today. I thought it was sort of tacky. Especially before 2016. I didn't think Roe v. Wade could really fall. And the reminder that people die from illegal abortions felt like a narrative from another era. And so I need to apologize to my elders for not heeding their wisdom. As I remember those moments with other advocates, I've been considering their ages and noticing that they were of reproductive age before 1972. They knew the impact of those hangers. It wasn't just a part of history for them, and I think that's why they knew better than I that it could become a part of the present as well. That's one part of it. I want to acknowledge that, of course, not just women can get pregnant. There are men and non-binary people who are also at risk. And for the sake of this sermon, I'm going to say women and mothers sometimes. Those words do not encompass men and non-binary people, but women are the broadest category of affected people, and I'm going to acknowledge that by using the words women and mothers. Another piece is the awareness of how unequal the impact of this decision will be, not just in terms of red states and blue states, although that is a big deal, but also in terms of socioeconomic status. People of means have always had access to safe, medically appropriate abortions, even if they had to fly to Europe to get them. As per usual, those who live in poverty will pay a higher price. And it is impossible to ignore that maternal mortality is abominably high in the United States, and most of the deaths are Black women, followed by other brown women, while white women have pretty reasonable maternal mortality rates, which is to say, in stark terms, that an impact of this decision is that more Black women are going to die. And to make it even less comfortable, even more horrifying, I guess, some of the unspoken and underlying motivation for abortion bans is white supremacy, whereby there's a desire to prevent white women having white babies from ending those pregnancies, and a willingness to end all abortion to keep white women pregnant with white babies. And that is a motivation that ends up killing Black and brown women. There was a Freudian slip this week when a congresswoman called the Supreme Court decision a historic victory for white life. It was sort of odd to hear it stated directly instead of just being implied. So that's a part of it all. Then there's the normal, obvious part of grief around this decision, the impact on those who are pregnant and don't want to be, and the incredible variation of how that came to be and what impact it will have on them. Earlier this month, The Atlantic published an article entitled "The Most Important Study in the Abortion Debate," which reports on the research of Diana Green Foster, looking at the difference between what happens to women who were or were not able to access an abortion. The study lasted for 5 years and included 1,000 people seeking to end pregnancies, they found that those who were denied an abortion were more likely to end up living in poverty. They had worse credit scores, and even years later were more likely not to have enough money for the basics, such as food and gas. They were more likely to be unemployed. They were more likely to go through bankruptcy or eviction. The two groups were economically the same when they sought an abortion. One became poorer. Also, those who were denied an abortion were more likely to be with a partner who abused them. To be a single parent, they had more trouble bonding with their children, were more likely to feel trapped, had more anxiety, lower self-esteem, and less likely to even have aspirational life plans. They were sicker. And in fact, 2 of the people denied an abortion died from their pregnancies. None of the people who had abortions died. Since most people seeking an abortion already have kids, the research was also able to study the impact of not being able to access an abortion on existing kids. That is, they were less likely to hit developmental milestones and more likely to live in poverty. And this truth also applied to children born after the abortion or lack thereof. And of course, there were economic impacts. Oh my goodness. Emotional impacts. It's not all about money. Quote, afterward, nearly all said that termination had been the right decision. At 5 years, only 14% felt any sadness about having an abortion. 2 in 3 ended up having no or very few emotions about it at all. Relief was the most common feeling, and an abiding one. The decision made by the Supreme Court condemns impoverished women and families to harder lives. Because as we know, the ones who are pregnant are the ones who know what is best for them and their families. The data backs it up. They know when they cannot adequately care for a child or another child. So that's a part of it. And also, there are the pieces where some states are having full bans on abortion without exception for the life of the mother, nor rape, nor incest. Now, I have major concerns about the impact of having to convince someone that you were raped or experienced incest in order to be able to access healthcare, but nevertheless, the impact of being forced to carry that child to term is enormous. And many people will die simply because of the lack of exception for the life of the mother. So that's another part of it. I am hoping that breaking this up actually helps a little. It is depressing, I know, but when all of it swirls together into one huge, overwhelming grief, it feels even more out of control. Knowing that there are layers helps me distinguish between them. And I am now at the personal layer where the grief is for me, not just for me, but for me. The decision tells me that I do not have authority over my own body. I don't have a right to my body. Big Brother has the right to tell me what I can and cannot do with my body. When this decision came out, I became a second-class citizen. Some people in this country have rights over their body. I am no longer one of them. Some people have bodily autonomy. I am no longer one of them. Some people have a right to life-saving health care, and I am no longer one of them. To go back to the Atlantic, quote, the legal and political debate about abortion in recent decades has tended to focus more on the rights and experience of embryos and fetuses than the people who gestate them. My body in this country has more value as a womb for a future human than as an existing human. The Supreme Court gaveth, and the Supreme Court tooketh away. The history of women being seen as property of men is still present. It's still having impact. It is no longer history. We are now, it seems, property of the state, who can tell us what we can and cannot do with our bodies. So that's another part. And a friend on Facebook this week put things into some context. She is a person of color. And she said, if they're willing to do this to white women, I shudder to think what they're willing to do to us. I am aware that some of the strength of my horror at having bodily autonomy taken from me comes from the fact that I thought it was mine to begin with, which has a lot to do with my places of privilege in society. That's another part. And among privileges is the fact that I live in New York, which not only protects the right to abortion, but isn't even one of the border states people will flock to when they lose privileges in their own states, provided that Pennsylvania, where I was born, holds strong. Which is to say that what I have lost is more theoretical than for those who have actually lost rights to their bodies in their states. And I have to hold that in tension too, which is another part. Those are many of the pieces of grief and tension I've been holding. This is my current lament, and I believe that the Bible shows us that lament is important. But what do we do now? Where is that good news that God appointed Isaiah and then Jesus to share? Where's the good news for the poor, for the captives in their own bodies, the oppressed? I may be stating the obvious, but it's not here yet. And we don't just stop there. We can do what we've done today. We can grieve because there has been a loss. And we can deny the narrative. The state has said that I don't have authority over my body, and many of the rest of you don't either. And that may in fact now be legally true, but it is morally and ethically bankrupt. The state cannot take away the sanctity of bodily autonomy or the value of human rights. We can deny the power of the state to bureaucratically take dominion over human bodies, and we can do so in whatever means are necessary. Because God is the one who said that we are created in the image of the divine and that our lives are sacred, and the state actually cannot take away what God has endowed. There is actually a quite wonderful tradition of progressive Christian activism to support those in need of abortions. And the strength of that tradition will be a part of what guides us now. And there are amazing new leaders emerging, and part of our work is to listen for great ideas and support them. Because some of those groups are led by those who know exactly what to do to support the most vulnerable. So we support those groups. In the meantime, I suggest we all take some inventories of the spiritual and physical resources we have available to us, communally and individually, so that we know what we have to offer when support is asked of us. God does not let oppression stand. We are working with God towards justice. May the urgings of the Spirit and the wisdom of those impacted help us find our ways forward in this new and old struggle. Amen.